I remember a few years ago in university, as part of a psychology course, we were asked to watch a video in which people were passing a basketball back and forth from one to the other. Some people had black shirts, and some people were wearing white shirts. We were asked to count how many times the people in the white shirts passed the ball. Once the video was concluded, we were asked how many times we'd seen the ball passed, and most of us replied 15, which was correct. We were then asked who saw the gorilla. Excuse me, gorilla? Well, it turned out it wasn't actually a gorilla, but it was a person in a gorilla suit who walked right through the middle of the basketball game. No one saw the gorilla. Now, none of us is blind, but clearly we were not seeing everything that was going on. I found this absolutely fascinating. And then later on in graduate school at the Vancouver School of Theology, as part of an ethics course, we were given a situation where a traffic accident happened in the middle of an intersection. We were divided into 4 groups, mimicking all 4 corners of the intersection, and then again we watched a video of the accident taking place. Each group had a slightly different version of events according to the position and perspective they had at the time. The idea was to show us that there really are no black and white situations. We react to everything that we experience from the position we are in at the time. And this can be mentally and emotionally, as well as visually and physically. It's a big part of the legal system when it comes to witnesses. We realize that there are many occasions when the term reliable witness is a misnomer. It's also the same with our inward psyches and emotions. I'm sure many of you who are parents or teachers or have been around young people have had to discipline a child for misbehaving or in some way channel their behaviors into something more productive. I remember having a discussion with my mother a few years ago when we were reminiscing about my childhood and teenage years and my occasionally not so great behavior. I was never that bad. But she and I had very different ideas or impressions of some of them. When I learned to understand a situation from her point of view, I realized why sometimes my parents had done what they did. I still didn't like it, but I did get it. Well, our gospel reading today refers to blindness, and I wonder how literal the affliction really is, or whether it's more of a metaphor for a different perspective. It is interesting to me that the blind beggar who shouts out to Jesus says, "My teacher, let me see again. My teacher, let me see again." This would lead us to believe that at some time previously he had been sighted. But it also makes me wonder whether in fact he was literally blind, or rather had he lost his faith and become blind to God. The blind man has a name, Bartimaeus, and yet in the gospel account he's referred to as a beggar. I wonder how many roadside beggars we might refer to by name. While the lovely folks that go out each Saturday as part of the Westside Anglican Neighbourhood Ministry know many of their clients by name and weekly provide them with some basic necessities. And while some of them may be comfortable living on the street, many of them would love to have secure accommodation. Bartimaeus does not appear to enjoy that same level of assistance, however. When he hears that Jesus is coming by, he calls out loudly and persistently, "Son of David, have mercy on me." And his friends try to shut him up. Or maybe they're not his friends, maybe they're just the people standing around him, but they want him to be quiet. But Jesus asks the man, what can he do for him? And when the man responds that he would like to see again, Jesus responds, "Go, your faith has made you well." And immediately he regained his sight and followed Jesus. I wonder how many people are blind to faith. Perhaps they've never heard the message of the gospel, the good news. But in the case of our blind beggar, it seems to be more like he once had faith, and perhaps through circumstances has now given up on the belief that God cares about him and for him. Now, if you contrast the beggar, who perhaps through trials and trauma lost his faith and perhaps his eyesight, with poor Job, who had everything thrown at him and yet remained steadfast in his faith, I ask, why would one man remain faithful to God through terrible adversity and another crumble? Well, it's believed that the book of Job is not to explain the mystery of suffering, but rather to probe the depths of faith in the middle of suffering. An ancient folk tale, it is a discussion between Job and his friends who question his faithfulness to God, and a discussion between Job and God. Referring to the notes in my study Bible, it says, in the poetic language of the book, God is at work in the universe, and God is fully aware of evil. At the same time, God cares for Job so much that he reveals himself personally and shares the vision of cosmic responsibilities. A God who confesses his burdens to a human being is a God who is profoundly involved in human destiny. He is also a God who respects human independence and respects the free will that human beings enjoy. The restoration of Job at the end of the story is not the point of the book, but rather a recognition of Job's integrity and in line with divine generosity. That same generous, divine generosity is shown towards Bartimaeus by Jesus. He doesn't ask him what caused him to lose his eyesight and perhaps his faith, but rather commends Bartimaeus for still having that spark of something that prodded him to call out to Jesus and ultimately healed him of his blindness. The story tells us that Bartimaeus jumped up, throwing off his cloak. Is this again a literal or a psychological and emotional act? In that moment, was the beggar able to recognize the healing hand of God and let go of traumas that had rendered him blind? There are many reasons for people to lose or question their faith. Some people seem to suffer profound losses, pain, hardships, and other tragedies of life. I've been reading books recently by and about Indigenous people who've suffered unspeakable traumas at residential schools and institutions. And I've also just finished reading By Chance Alone by Mac Eisen, his story of surviving the Second World War in a concentration camp at the age of 15, the only member of his family to survive. The treatment of other human beings by human beings in both cases certainly caused me some sleepless nights and long dialogues with God on my walks along the dikes with summer. And while I cannot imagine how I would survive in such circumstances, I am amazed at the strength and resilience of those who have endured such vile treatment. The people in the books I've been reading have survived well enough to be able to recount their experiences, and that to me would seem to be faith enough, that in telling of their stories, they want the world to know that they endured, persevered, and prevailed, albeit with battle scars which they will carry forever. The story of blind beggars appears both in Matthew and Luke also. In Matthew's Gospel, there are 2 blind beggars, but in Luke and Mark, just 1. But Mark is the only Gospel who actually gives the blind man a name, Bartimaeus. There is also a notation in my Bible that says that him calling out to Jesus with the name Son of God was a very risky thing to do, as it identified Jesus as the King of the Jews. And that's what may have prompted those around him to tell Bartimaeus to be quiet and not draw attention to them all. As in so many of the gospel stories, in fact biblical stories, God and Jesus meet humanity where they are, where we are, in times of direst need. How we respond is up to us. I wonder how you might respond if Jesus walked by. Are you in need of divine healing right now? Is there a hurt in your life that's holding you back from accepting that healing? So much of our relationship with God is based on forgiveness that sometimes long-held hurts can build a wall between us and God, and between us and someone who we may have wronged, or who may have wronged us. Perhaps it's time to bust through that wall, or peek over it, and be able to see the wound from the other person's point of view. And then hold out the hand of friendship and forgiveness and find healing, new insight, and eyesight. Whether we are literally or figuratively blind, have lost our faith because of what life has pressed upon us, or simply have not responded to the call, God, through Jesus, is calling to us. The great healer can and will restore us in mind, body, and spirit. We just have to jump up, throw off our cloak, and see again. Amen.